Hi there, my name is John. I'm the creator of WebDev for You, a website and YouTube channel dedicated to helping users build websites without code in Webflow. In today's video, I'm going to showcase how to build this menu trigger animation that has an animation on page load, on click, and on hover. So as we can see here, the menu trigger is already animating with the circle kind of infinitely rotating. Then when we hover, the circle scales in, and when we click, the colors change, this X appears, and the text changes from menu to close. And when I click again, we have the menu trigger kind of have that animation in reverse. All right, so this can be a fun menu trigger depending on the style of your website, but I am excited to showcase it because there are many different components to it. And it was inspired by this website here, the Carmen project, and where they have this kind of menu trigger. So I decided to kind of recreate it in Webflow. All right, so this is what we will be building today. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'll go to a blank project here in Webflow. Let's start with a section, and I'll give it the class name 162-section. We'll give it the min height of 100 VH for demonstration purposes. And I'll give it the display setting of flex center so we can place the menu trigger in the center. I'll go ahead and add a div block. I'll give it the class name 162 menu trigger wrapper. And I'm starting with 162 because it's interaction 162. And I'll give this a specific width and height of 200 by 200. You can make this menu trigger smaller, but for these purposes, I've set it to 200 by 200 pixels in width and height. Then I'll set the position to relative because we're going to add an absolute positioned element inside of it. And that's about it. And we'll set the cursor to pointer so that the user knows that they'll be able to click on this menu trigger here. Okay, I'll open the navigator so you can follow along with the site structure or the trigger structure as I build it. The next thing I'll add is a div block, and I'll give this the class name 162 menu trigger outer. And this will be the outer circle. So we have the outer circle, we have this inner circle, we have this dot, then we have this X here, and we have this text on the left. Okay, so for this outer, I'm going to set the position to absolute and full, so it fills the parent element that's set to relative. Then I'll give it a border radius of 50%. I'll set the border to 1 pixel in black, and that's it. So we have the menu trigger outer, that looks good. And let's add the menu trigger inner. So let me see here. One other thing we need to do for the menu trigger wrapper is we need to apply a flex setting of flex and center. So when I add the menu trigger inner, it is applied in the center. So here I'll hit Command K, I'll add a div, and let me pin the navigator so it stays in place. Okay, and we want to add this div block inside of the menu trigger wrapper, not inside of the menu trigger outer. And we'll give it the class name 162 menu trigger inner. We'll give it a specific width and height of 100 by 100. And we'll set the, let's see here, we'll set the position to relative because we're going to add another circle inside of it. So we'll say relative, and we'll set the border here. We'll give it a solid border of 2 pixels, set the border radius to 50% to make it a perfect circle, and the color black is okay there. Okay, inside the menu trigger inner, we're going to add another div block, and we're going to set the menu trigger inner to a flex setting of flex and center left. Okay, so justify center, and here we go. Yeah, justify center, or align center, and justify start. And then for this menu trigger circle, let's give it the class name 162 menu trigger circle, and we'll give it a width and height of 14 pixels by 14 pixels, and we'll set the background to black, and we'll set the radius to 50%. Okay, and then we'll give it a negative margin of -7, so it appears right on the inner circle. Okay, so yeah, that looks good there. So if I preview, this is what it looks like. We have the structure for the button. The last thing we need to do is create, or not the last thing, the next thing we need to do is create the close button. So inside the menu trigger wrapper, let me just double check. Yeah, inside the menu trigger wrapper, we're going to add a div block, and we're going to give it the class name 162 close button. And for this, we're going to set the position to absolute and give it a width and height of 50 by 50. And we will, let's see, let me just double check here. Yeah, we'll set the background color to black. So background color here, we'll set it to black, and border radius of 50%. And then for this, we'll also give it a display setting of flex center, and we'll add 2 lines in here. So I'll add a div block, and let's just double check. Okay, so I'll add a div, and this will be 162 close button line. And I'll give it a width of 20 pixels and a height of 2 pixels. And we'll set the background color to white, and we'll give it a border radius of 100. So it's rounded on the left and the right. Okay, and we'll set the position to absolute. Okay, let's see if that's correct. Actually, we don't need to set a position for this one. So then I'll copy and paste this line. I'll say duplicate, and we'll say 162 close button line -2 for the class name. And for this, we'll set the position, and actually for the close button, let's set it to vertical, not horizontal, for the flex setting. And then for the button line 2, let's set the position to absolute, so it goes on top of the first line. And yeah, that's about it. So just to recap, for the close button, has a flex setting of flex, vertical, center. The first button line is 20 pixels by 2, doesn't need a position. And then we copied and pasted the first line, duplicated the class, and gave it a position of absolute. And both lines have a background color of white and border radius of 100. And that's it. Now for the first line, let's also go to 2D and 3D transforms. Let's give it a rotation of 45 degrees. And the second line, we'll click the plus and rotate it -45 on the Z axis. And that'll give us the X. Okay, so just to recap the structure, we have the menu trigger outer, menu trigger inner with the circle. And then we have the close button with the 2 lines to form the X. All right, and the last thing we need to add is the text. So for the menu trigger wrapper, I'll add a div block, and I'll call this 162 menu text wrapper. We'll give it a position of absolute, and we'll position it to the left, and we'll set the top and bottom to auto. So I'll hold down Option and just set it to auto there on the top and bottom. Okay, and then in here I'll add a text block, and we'll give it the class name 162 menu close text. And here I'll say menu for the text, and I'll go ahead and style it. I'll say I don't have works on here. Let's see. We'll say Montserrat, and we'll make it bold. All right, and we'll make the color black. Okay, and I'll move I'll move this menu text wrapper a little bit to the left, maybe 14%. There we go. So then I'll copy and paste this menu close text, and I'll give it a combo class of 2, and I'll say position absolute and full. Okay. And yeah, I think that looks good there. And then for the second text, I'll say close. And for the menu text wrapper, I'll just add some padding of maybe 15 to the left so that the text fits inside of the text wrapper. Great, so right now they're on top of each other, which is okay. Yeah, because we'll be animating it. So this is what the structure should look like initially, and now I'll go ahead and animate it. So the first thing we're going to animate is the circle rotating infinitely. So here we can see the circle is rotating. Great, so let's go into Webflow. Let's create a page load interaction. So on page load, we're going to start an animation. I'll click the plus, and I'll say 162 menu trigger page load. And we'll select the menu trigger inner, click the plus, I'll say rotate, and we'll rotate it on the z-axis 360 degrees. And the duration will say 3 seconds and an easing of ease. And then to reset it, we'll say rotate, and we'll rotate it back to 0. We'll remove the duration, and that's it. And then we'll click save, and then we'll click loop right here to infinitely loop this rotation. So I'll preview, we'll see it rotates infinitely. Okay, so that's the first step. The next step is to scale in the outer circle when we hover. Okay, so that should be fairly straightforward. So I'll click the menu trigger wrapper, go to interactions, click the plus, I'll say mouse hover. On hover, we'll start an animation. I'll click the plus here, and I'll say 162. Wait, did I say mouse click or hover? Let me see. Yeah, on hover, okay. 162, mouse trigger, hover in. And I'll select the menu trigger outer, click the plus, I'll say scale. We'll scale it down to 0.7, and we'll say ease, and an easing of 0.5 is fine. Okay, I'll click save, and there we go. And then on hover out, we'll start an animation. I'll duplicate the hover in, and we'll say mouse trigger, hover out. And then I'll scale it back to 1. Click save, and there we go. Looks good. All right, and then let's create the click interaction. So I'll click the plus, I'll say on mouse click or tap, I'll start an animation. We'll start a new timed animation. I'll say 162 menu trigger first click. And on click, we want to scale down this circle. So for the circle, I'll select it, scale it to 0. We'll say an easing of ease, 0.5 is fine. And then for the close button, we'll scale it to 0, and we'll set it as the initial state. So initially we don't see it. And then we'll scale it back to 1 with the circle scaling out. Okay, so we have the menu trigger circle scaling out, and we have the close button scaling in. So when I preview, we don't see it. And when I click, we have the X appear. And now I just need to animate this text. So for the second text, we want to move it down 100% on the y-axis initially. So I'll set it as the initial state, and that looks good. And then we want to move up the menu text. So I'll move it negative 100%, and we'll start it with the scale. We'll set the easing to ease. And then for the second text here, we'll move it back to 0%. And we'll set the easing to ease and start it with the other animations. So now when I preview, there we go. And the last thing I need to do here is go back to the menu text wrapper and set the overflow to hidden, so we don't see anything outside the bounds of this menu text wrapper. So when I preview, we just have menu, and it turns to close. Okay. looks good. And let's go back into the click interaction and let's do the second click. So on second click, we'll start an animation. I'll duplicate the first click and I'll say 162 menu trigger second click. There we go. I'll delete these initial states and we'll just reverse everything. So we'll scale the circle back to 1. We'll scale the close button back to 0. We'll move the text here to 0% and the second text back to 100% on the y-axis, so it moves down. So we click, we have the X, we click again, and perfect. All right, so the last thing we would need to do is change colors. So this is an optional step. I just decided to do it because I thought it was cool, but we can go ahead and do that. Let me just add a menu wrapper here. So I'm gonna say, add a div block in the section. I'll say 162 menu wrapper. I'll say position absolute and full, and we'll give it a background color of black, and we'll set it behind the menu trigger so we can select the menu trigger. Okay, so I'll select the menu trigger wrapper, go to interactions, go to the first click. On first click, let's select the menu wrapper. We're going to move it -100% and set it as the initial state so we don't see it. And then we'll move it to 0% on the x-axis. Let me make sure I did that. So this one needs to be on the x, -100%. Set it as the initial state, then we'll move it back to 0%, set the easing to ease. And then we'll go ahead and change the color of the different elements here. So for the scale, for the menu trigger circle outer, we're going to change the border color to white, set the easing to ease, and duration of 0.5 is fine. The menu trigger inner, we'll change the border color to white, set the easing to ease, duration of 0.5 is good, and we don't need to change the menu trigger circle. The close button, we do need to change the background color to white. Set the easing to ease. And the two lines here, we need to change them to black. So we'll change the background color here to black for this one. And change the background color for this one to black as well. And just make sure that they all have an easing of ease. And the duration of 0.5 is okay. And we also need to change the text color. So for the menu close text, let's change the text color to, it would be white. Okay, and an easing of ease. And then the second one, same thing, text color to white, easing of ease. Okay, so let's see if we did that correctly. Perfect. All right, looks good. So changes the color and awesome. So now we just need to reverse that. So I'm going to delete the second click and I'll duplicate the first click again. And we'll just reverse everything similar to how we did it the first time. So we'll delete all the initial states for scale on this one. For the circle, let's see, menu trigger. Yeah, the circle will scale it to 1. The close button will scale to 0. The menu close text will move it back to 0%. And the second text will move it back down to 100% on the y-axis. The menu wrapper will move it back to -100%, so it moves to the left. The border color for the menu trigger outer, we'll set it back to black. For the inner, the circle inner, we'll set it back to black. The background color for the close button, we'll set it back to black. The close button lines, we'll set them back to white. And for these ones, we'll set them back to white. For the second line, I should say, for that one. And the text will change back to black. The first text and the second text. Okay, so now if I preview, click, there we go. And awesome. Cool, so that's how we create that menu trigger on click. You can then fill, you can place this menu trigger in the upper right. So I can do something like, let's see here, the section, I can just do the right and top, and then the menu trigger, I can add some margin to the top and right. And we have a menu trigger here in the upper right that opens a menu. All right, so that's how we create interaction number 162. I know that was quite a few steps. Again, this project is clonable for free in the description area below. You can clone this right into your own dashboard and see how I created all the different steps and the structure of this interaction by cloning the project. You can click on the clone button here and it'll take you to the page to clone the project. Again, this was inspired by carmenproject.org, where they have this menu trigger, and I thought it would be fun to recreate in Webflow. Okay, so thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video tutorial. Thank you.